Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Well, I'm really honored to be asked to do this. I think if you look at the world and the way that populations are changing, I think personally that gerontology is one of the most important topics that we could study at the university. And when we look at the reasons, or the effects of aging on people's lives, a lot of those effects can be either mitigated or exacerbated by the lifestyle choices that people make. And one of the lifestyle choices has to do with relationships that they're involved in. And so it's always been very interesting for me to study relationships and the connection that they have between people's aging processes and their health and well-being. So I thought what I would do today is give you kind of a fast rundown of the work that we have going on, and first I'll start off with a broader picture of the field and then some specific studies here at Virginia Tech. So we should begin with thinking about, first of all, who is close in our lives. And of course it's obvious, we know that family and friends are close to most people in society. But I also wanted to point out that research shows that some people feel very close to their coworkers and to members of clubs that they belong to, volunteer activities, churches. We usually think about friendship in particular as a relationship between equals, but some people find themselves to be friends with people where there are actually status or power differentials. So it's not necessarily always equals, although it often is. Of course, sometimes neighbors are considered to be close friends too. And we have in this picture here, we don't really know. You know, it's probably a birthday party, it's probably a lot of family members around there, but there could also be neighbors who have dropped by and friends and other people. What isn't shown in the picture is the cyber relationships, and this is a kind of a whole new field in the study of close relationships, how people make and manage and sustain their friendships that they have met online. And so that's a whole other line of research that's very new. It's not one that I've delved into, but there are people working on it. Not only friendship, but also romantic relationships that might be created online. So it's a implication of technology in our personal lives. What do close relationships provide for us? There's a theory that a Harvard psychologist, Robert Weiss, has developed. It's been used in a lot of research, and it really covers across the board the kinds of benefits that people get from close relationships. It has to do with affection and caring. Some relationships provide that. It has to do with social integration. It means companionship, shared activities, knowing that you belong to a group. We get support and guidance from our close relationships. Often we provide help to each other, and there are all sorts of instrumental kinds of assistance that people could get. Affirmation of our identity as a person and a member of a group, a member of a family, having a place in society is very important. And then one that you might not think about as often, but it's there, is this idea that it's important for us to know that other people count on us. So other relationships give us the opportunity to nurture them. And the relationships then are reciprocal back and forth. And that's an important component of close relationships. And why is support? We're really going to focus on social support today. Why is that important? There's a lot of research that's been done in many different domains with many groups of people, and confirming that social support is health promoting, it is health restoring, That is, when we feel a part of a group, we are often motivated to take better care of ourselves. We might get that prompt from someone to go get the medical checkup or get the condition looked into. We have a reason to maintain our health if we know other people care about us and are dependent on us. There's robust research that shows that people who have closer relationships and have meaningful relationships have a decreased risk for mortality, actually. There's a lot of research on how social support buffers the effects of stress. We all have daily hassles and we all have maybe bigger calamities that occur, and being able to get support, sympathy, assistance from people is really important in buffering the effects of stress. And all of that together really helps to promote psychological well-being. So friends are very important, and all close relationships are very important both for physical and psychological well-being. And let me share with you some more specifics on research that has been done directly about health. The more social integrated people are, that is, they can name companions or family members and friends who care about them, they have at least one person they can confide in, then the less likely they are to have, or the better they're able to manage the effects of chronic conditions. There's been research on many different kinds of chronic conditions, how people deal with asthma, how they deal with arthritis, how they deal with cardiovascular problems. And this research shows that the people who are socially integrated really seem to be able to manage that better. And in fact, there's some research that's going on now that has to do with training people to use pain control techniques that, instead of just relying on the individual as had been done before, you can train people how to manage pain. There's some new research that's being directed to dyads, so married couples or other partnerships. They found that people can learn to support each other, and it can have a direct effect on pain reduction, like in the case of osteoarthritis and that sort of thing. The more social support that people have, the lower the risk for mortality. Again, looking across a lot of different, this research controls for health, it controls for many other kinds of factors, and it seems to be a pretty broad and robust finding. The more social support that people have, the less likely they are to be depressed, or the way I showed it on here is the lower the support that people report, the more likely they are to express conditions like depression and other mental health problems. There's some interesting findings related to gender, and one of them is that women compared to men tend to receive more types of social support and more types, so both emotional and health-related social support. So women seem to be able to draw in the support that they need. At the same time, we know that women are very often the ones who are providing support to others. And so if it's balanced and reciprocal, then that's fine. But women, we know, also have larger social networks. They generally name more friends, more relatives that they feel closer to. And there's some research that shows that the larger the social network that you have, the more you could be under stress, because you have more people confiding in you and seeking support from you. And so learning to manage those demands is a challenge that people have. And so while women receive more support, they're also at somewhat of a greater risk for experiencing stress that's associated with having needs that other people are placing on them. And finally, there's some recent research that's very interesting about sort of what we call the dark side of relationships. We know that family and friendships are not always perfect, and people do have conflicts and problems that come up. And there's longitudinal studies to show that the negative events and the negative experiences that people have that are associated with their close relationships have a greater detrimental impact on them than the positive relationships or the positive events have in the other direction on their well-being. And so it's important for us as professionals to understand this and to learn how to help people manage the everyday stresses and conflicts and difficulties that might come up in relationships, because those tend to be the events and situations that are remembered for a longer period of time and that do weigh on people greatly. And so that's an important research implication, I think, for us to take out into our practice areas. Now, here at Virginia Tech, in the Department of Human Development and in the Center for Gerontology, there's been research going on about close relationships for many, many years. And I thought I would just give you some highlights of some of the studies and findings that we've been done in this area and how they relate to well-being that people have. One area that I've worked in is on friendship of older adults. One study was done at Warm Hearth when it first opened up. All of the people who moved in there were strangers to one another, and it gave us a perfect laboratory for studying the formation of friends in the later years of life. A lot of other scholars had done it among college students, because you can go to the dorms every fall and you get a new crop of people who are meeting and forming relationships with each other. But this was an unusual circumstance that we could find adults in that situation. And so we studied them over the course of time and tracked the friendships that they were forming and studied what was important about friends to them. And the first bullet there shows you that these were considered to be the most important elements of friendship. Trust, that you can count on somebody's word, that you can rely on them to be there for you and do what they might say they will do. Demonstrations of caring, that people in one way or another let their friend know that they care about them, and then not letting small problems blow out of proportion and get too large is really important to people as well. And these results we replicated. I did a community sample with a colleague at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and we studied a much larger population and a more diverse population of older adults in the Greensboro area, and found that these same characteristics of friendships were equally important to them, and they seemed to be very strong across the board. Now, back to the Warm Hearth study, we had, of course, new friendships that were formed that we asked the people to discuss, but we also asked them to talk about the old longtime friends that they had from wherever they had lived before they moved into Warm Hearth. And it was very interesting how the distinctions came out between the old friends and the new friends. The new friends were the people that they saw all the time. They talked about the importance of companionship. Being able to run down the hall and borrow an egg from somebody was important, and they appreciated the fact that they were able to find congenial people to interact with in this new environment that they had moved to. But they really reserved their deepest feelings of affection and caring for their longtime friends. And it was interesting because in many cases they didn't even see these longtime friends. They lived at a distance and they weren't very frequently in contact with them. But they truly believed that if they needed anything, if they were really in need of support, that it was those old friends, those long-term friends, who would be there for them. And that has a lot of psychological value, even if you never test the assumption. It's important to know that there are people in your network that you could count on that way. We also found in both of the studies that I mentioned that there seems to be a greater tolerance for little idiosyncrasies and difficulties that come up in friendships as compared maybe to the studies that have been done on college student samples. And there's a parallel line of research going on right now about emotional regulation in the later years. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that as people grow older, they have they can build on the experiences that they've had in life, and they seem to become better able at regulating their emotions so that they are able to sustain the kinds of relationships that they want to have and that are meaningful to them to have. And I think that's how we could explain this finding, that where younger people are much more likely to say if somebody's really bothering them that they will end that relationship because they figure there are lots of others that they could pursue. Older people are less likely to say that, and we tried to ask, did you ever end a friendship on purpose? We were really interested in how they went about it, and a few people did, and they told us about it, but mostly they did not. They said that sometimes they let friendships kind of fade away, but mostly it seemed that they just kind of tolerated, even though they didn't like some personal characteristics of the people that they were interacting with. Another line of research that we've been pursuing has to do with recognizing that older adults live in family contexts, most of them, and that families have a lot of different ways of existing these days. There's a lot of diversity in the family structures and the interaction patterns that take place in families. And it seemed that nobody was really asking older adults what they thought about that and how they were responding to the world around them in their immediate family or, in the larger society. And so we set out to ask a group of families. This was in rural Southwest Virginia. Rural elders' experiences are not studied as much as the people in urban areas, so we often focus on that here at Virginia Tech. And we were asking them about different family events and situations, whether they had experienced them, and what they thought about what was going on. And there were many different kinds of things that we asked them about. Divorce and premarital pregnancy would be examples, but also things like whether there was incarceration in the family, whether there was addiction, whether there was bankruptcy. We tried to cover a range of different kinds of things. And this is a very nutshell sort of summary here, but we identified people that we would call living a conventional lifestyle. A conventional family lifestyle is that you get married, then you have children, and you stay married until one person dies. No divorce or anything like that. And we did find, of course, in this area, a few families that had lived, a few elders had lived this conventional lifestyle in their own history. Many fewer of them had children living a conventional lifestyle because there's a lot of divorce in the next generation, and they acknowledged that. But what was really interesting to us was all of the people who reported in their own history and among their offspring what we would call a pluralistic family lifestyle. And that it was really quite wide-ranging. It could include divorce that had happened, but it also might be the case, for example, of a woman who knew a family, the wife and mother died, she married the grieving husband and raised the two sons that he already had, and they had another son together. So that's not a typical pattern in that conventional image, and we found many, many different kinds of examples of that. And in general, what we found is that the older adults were perfectly accepting of the fact that they're living in a contemporary society that doesn't always follow those normative traditional rules any longer. They would say things like, well, of course, there's divorce in my family. You could hardly have 4 children and not expect there to be one who got divorced. And they seem to be able to fit in with the contemporary society. And we found, in fact, that the people who were like that conveyed that they were better adjusted. They seemed to be psychologically happier people and to have better relationships with their families. And it was one attempt to sort of counteract a stereotype, that old people are rigid and they can't change and things like that. And we found that's really not true. We've been studying also how families influence the choices of the elderly members, again in rural Southwest Virginia, about whether to use formal services or not. There's some concern that formal services aren't as widely available in rural areas as they are in urban areas, but even sometimes when they're available, people don't take advantage of them. And so we're trying to figure out what is influencing the decision of families who have older adults in them who might need some assistance to use those services or not use them. most older adults want to stay in their own home. That's the preference that's expressed, universally. They want to be able to live independently and live in their familiar surroundings. So what happens if they become in need of some kinds of assistance? Usually it's the family members who step in and provide help, and then we also found not only families but friends and neighbors, members of their church and other community people that we call informal helpers because they're not being paid to do it, are highly likely to step in and provide the support for as long as they can. So it's kind of a myth out there that families dump their elders in the nursing home. That's really not what happens. Nursing home is the last resort. It's expensive, and you have to have medical need to be admitted anyway. So we need to sort of put that myth aside and recognize all of the labor that families are contributing to sustain their elders in their own home. And we found that the majority of the people in our study were getting help either just from family and friends, the informal, or from both informal sources, and then having that supplemented by some kind of formal services. These people all were still living in their home, and some of them had quite a lot of disabilities and limitations, but the families were doing a lot to help them. So it's important to keep that in mind, because the longer people can live in their own homes and maintain their independence, the better off they will be both physically and psychologically. I also have to say, though, that it's important to recognize when institutional care is needed, so that sometimes people's medical needs really exceed what family members are trained to do. And I always encourage people to recognize that sometimes the best and most loving care and choice that can be made is to place the person in a facility where they will be safe and well cared for. So we want to maintain that balance of helping people as long as they can be, but recognizing sometimes their needs are greater than what we can provide. And then I also wanted to just mention a study that's in the field right now. We're looking at a fairly new diagnosis in the arena of memory loss and mental health changes in old age. And you've all heard of Alzheimer's disease, but this diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment is more recent because we have better methods of testing and detecting when people are showing signs that may or may not lead to Alzheimer's disease. So there's a lot of neuropsychological research that's being done on that, but what we were interested in looking at is how is the family responding to this sort of diagnosis. So we're working with the VA in Salem and with Carilion to interview the elders and the families who come through their clinics for assessment of their memory problems, and we are interested in answering these kinds of questions. It's a very uncertain diagnosis because nobody can say what the future holds. It may be a very long-term sort of stable pattern. There could be changes. We don't know the implications of physical health changes that might co-occur. We also are asking what would be helpful to them. These people are sort of pioneers in this new domain of family medicine and of psychology, and so we're asking what would they find to be helpful and seeing if we can then eventually, at the end of our study, develop some of those materials that might be useful for physicians and other practitioners to use, or that we could supply directly to families through support groups. We want to know, this is a longitudinal study, so we'll be following these families over time, and there is a possibility that for at least some of them, the cognitive memory processes will deteriorate, and then we want to look at how the family is managing those changes. We have seen that already some people, even though they're in very early stages, and the elders would seem to you perfectly normal, and some of them are still employed, but they've already made some lifestyle changes. One family has moved into from their private home into a retirement community where they feel that if they need it eventually, the supports will be there. So some people kind of look ahead, but we find that a lot of people are reluctant to look ahead. They really don't want to make plans and think about the future too much. And so we're trying to see how could we help with that process. And then given that a lot of the care that's provided as somebody's cognitive functioning and physical functioning deteriorates, that care is provided by family members, we also want to look at what are the best ways for sustaining these caregivers who are not in the same category as the people who are caring for somebody who has Alzheimer's disease. They're in really a different time of the caregiving trajectory, and so we're looking to see what are going to be the best ways that we could advise professionals to look after them. I would like to encourage you in just having this brief snapshot to think about sustaining your own relationships in your life, all of them that you may have. And I think that will go far to helping you age as gracefully as you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you.